All right. Up next, we have Timothy. Timothy wrote in and said, "When I first started listening to Stefan on a regular basis, I didn't even realize that he was a staunch atheist. Stefan advocates the two-parent family, personal responsibility, free will, limited government, and capitalism, as many of his views parallel those held by most mainstream Christians. Does he have any objections to Christianity other than the existence of God?" That's from Timothy.
Timothy, hey, loved your bit in the Bible. How you doing?
Yeah, that's actually what I'm named after.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't expect it any other way.
Yeah, all four of my brothers have biblical names as well. So.
Well, of course, I was originally going to be called Yahweh, but people thought they'd have too much trouble. People would have too much trouble spelling it, so they went with Stefan Molyneux.
They wanted with something that even fewer people could pronounce.
That's right. And then please move to the colonies where nobody has any clue about this stuff. So, okay. Let me lay it on you, sort of the major complaint that I would have around Christianity, and you can let me know what you think.
All right.
So, my first complaint about Christians is you're so nice that you made me change my mind. Very inconvenient for a public intellectual. Very, very inconvenient. And I hope you're all ashamed of yourself for being so nice and positive and friendly and loving and affectionate and inviting. Oh, I can win against anything except niceness. It gets me every time.
All right, I'll send a memo out and we'll change that.
Please. If there's one thing you people have to atone for, it's being relentlessly positive and friendly. Oh, really helps me believe that you believe what you believe. So there's that. But the issue, so the main issue that I have, and this is not, of course, with all Christians, but is with certain elements of Christianity, which is the child raising, the old spare the rod, spoil the child kind of stuff. Not a big fan of that, and I've had some significant luck or skill or capacity to change people's minds in this area, Christians included, for which I'm grateful and humbled by the response. But many years ago, I did Power or Fear, a love story. Do you love God because God is powerful, or do you love God because God is good? Now, if you love God because he's powerful, you're worshiping power, which doesn't seem to me to be very moral. If you love God because he is good, then goodness should not evoke loyalty through fear, through dire consequences, through punishment. And the concern that I've had, and for many years and still do have, is, and this is not particular to Christians, and it's to the left as well. You know, if you don't believe in the patriarchy, you're a misogynist. You're a bad person. You know, if you don't think that white people are responsible for all the ills in the world, you're a bad person. I mean, it happens in a lot of belief systems. But my concern with religion has been how much it frightens children into complying with the ideals. That, to me, is the major issue. Yes, Christians and I agree on an enormous amount. And it took me some time in the wilderness to appreciate that, and I can't apologize too often for some of the statements I've made in the past about Christianity and Christians. I was falling prey to, hey, let's take the nicest people around and pretend we're a hero by criticizing them. So I hope I have redeemed myself with courage since that particular time. But yeah, it's that issue where it's the fire and the hellstone, fire and the brimstone, and the devil is always watching, and he's going to tempt you, and you know the sinful thoughts and the self-censorship and so on that goes on. That, to me, and it's not all Christianity, and there's arguments for and against this particular perspective in the Bible, but my concern is how much that can debilitate children from a true sense of free will and self-ownership.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that. I know my parents were pretty religious when I was younger, and they went to a pretty strict church. But then when I was around 10 or so, we started going towards a church that was kind of more non-denominational and was a little less sinners in the hands of the angry God, and a little more Jesus is love and God is love sort of thing. There was still pretty strict rules in place, but it wasn't, they weren't out there giving you the evil eye for the length of your shirt, and calling women hussies for it's like, oh, your hymn's too low. What do you want to get raped or anything? Like, there's kind of borderline Sharia law sort of thing, right? So I understand that some people kind of have that perception of church, and I get this a lot when I talk with Catholics, is they seem to be more along the side of the cross. And I know that the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of the Cross, it was like an hour and 15-minute long like gore fest of, and then 5 minutes.
And it doesn't seem to have given him a very positive view of Jews. Maybe he didn't have that beforehand. I think his father had some issues that way as well. But apparently he's back with hacksaw ridge and rehabilitated with giant beard. Anyway, go ahead.
And then at like the last 5 minutes of the movie, that's when they're talking about the resurrection. You're like, wait, that's. I was always raised that was like the important part. It wasn't about the brutality of his death. It was about he came back and he overcame everything there was to overcome in one person's life. I mean, even if you go with the Jordan Peterson perspective, where it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a metaphor, or he's the moral epiphany of what humans should strive to be. So he overcame all of the, every moral thing that someone could do wrong. Jesus absolutely did. He's the epitome of perfection as far as doing the right things for all of the right reasons. And even at the end
and I would argue that the resurrection is essential to provide a continuum from the ideal of Jesus to the possibility of humanity. If he was the best human being who had ever lived and he died, then his perfection as an ideal would die with him, because you can't match that, right? But if he comes back from the dead, I think to me that's a way that you can pick up the thread and continue, because if his ideals or his spirit, his capacities exceed death, then they can move forward through time. They don't die with him, and I would guess that had something to do with it as well. That's at a very metaphorical level rather than, of course, something literal, but that's one of the things I got out of it when I was younger.
Yeah, it's basically the idea of a man is mortal, but an idea is immortal.
Right. And if you identify Christianity with Christ, you're not a Christian, because Christianity is the emulation of the ideals of Christ in your own life, right? You wouldn't want to say that, because if Christianity is Christ, then Christianity died when Christ died, at least the second time. So I'm way out of my depth theologically, I'm sure, but that's sort of my impression.
That's a pretty viable impression, but the reason I started mentioning that was like, it seems to be more of the Orthodox Christianity tends to focus all of, on following the rules, the rigid structures, and I was always been raised that that's kind of more along the lines of the people that Jesus actually spoke out against, the Pharisees and Sadducees. Those were the people who obey the law to the T, and just criticize or cast down anyone who even stumbles slightly, but all they have in their heart is hate. And Jesus was like, you're doing it wrong. You're polishing the outside, and inside you are dead. And that's kind of, I don't want to kind of belittle Catholics and things like that. I know my grandparents were Catholics for most of their life, and then they kind of became more Protestant as they got older. But most of the encounters I've had with devout Catholics, they kind of go towards that, the follow the rules just to follow the rules without trying to even understand why the rules are there.
Well, this to me was always the challenge about free will. And I was raised Protestant. And in Protestantism, free will and get the hell up and get to work. The two things that I sort of get at. Number one, free will. Number two, the sun has been up for 18 minutes. Why have you not done 4 hours of work yet? That was sort of the two things. But the question of hell in my upbringing was not central, was not core to how things were explained to me. I mentioned this before, but I have a very strong memory We had a very old preacher when I was in boarding school. A priest, I should say. Preacher is a 10th thing from the South. But an old priest who seemed to have a weird fetish for begats, like the Bible. Everyone starts reading the Bible who's interested in it, and you get to the begats, and it's like, whoa, worst porn ever. begats, right? Can I get a VR begat? No.
It goes on for like 25 chapters.
It really does. It really does. It doesn't matter if you put on the 70s disco music. It just doesn't matter. If you put on a porn stash, it's a lot of begatting and not a whole lot of excitement. But we had a young guy who came in. I guess he was cycling through, and we had a young guy who came in, and I remember him, and God threw Satan into a big pond and put up a big sign saying "No fishing." Yeah, it was, I was 7. What the hell? It was entertaining, but I remember that very clearly. He was an entertaining, engaging guy, but that was, he was like a joke, not like a joke, like not serious, but he was sort of portrayed like, yeah, don't fish, no fishing, right? It wasn't like. There is James Joyce in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man has reproduced and he was Catholic or Irish, right? Has reproduced a priest talking about the sounds and the smells of hell. And it's really, really important to read this. It's a great book in many ways, although he got kind of weird with the Dubliners. But anyway, it's a powerful book because that is what a lot of children were exposed to. It wasn't me. I was not overly traumatized by hell. I believed in the devil and he was around, but it was kind of like a C.S. Lewis devil who was going to tempt you with inconsequentiality into drifting away from God, not let's go step on some hobos. It wasn't that sort of thing, right? And so I didn't experience that. And I think the reason I didn't experience that was because the focus on free will is antithetical to waking death by Satan every single moment. Because if the hellfire and the brimstone and the lake of fire and the gnashing of the teeth and the wailing is hovering and imminent all around you, like some flaming pterodactyl going to peck out your eyeballs if you look at it the wrong way, where's your free will in that? That to me was the big question when I sort of talked to people about this, even when I was younger as a kid and was exposed to that. It's sort of like saying, okay, I've kidnapped your children. You can pay me $1 million or you'll never see them again. You still have free will though, don't you? It's like, I don't really know that you do anymore because the situation is so extreme that you really don't have free will. Of course, you're free to pay the $1 million or whatever, take the risk. But that's not free will the way I would understand it because it's so constrained by the danger of the situation. And so as the sort of specter of Satan and hell rises up, you can get more compliance. Like you can get the guy to give you $1 million if you kidnap his kids. But I'm just not sure. I was never sure, and I remain unsure that it's fundamentally moral to threaten people into virtue or to bribe them with heaven into virtue. And that was one of the challenges that I always had with this focus on hell. Are you good if you're scared? Are you good if you're bribed? Are you good if you do things for the effect they're going to have on your future? To me, virtue has always been something that you should pursue for the sake of the moral excellence within virtue, not because you'll get a prize or a punishment on the other side.
Well, I agree with you on this, the punishment part, but I'm not quite sure about the reward being a bribe. I don't think I would necessarily call that or consider it that, because there's that metaphor of the carrot or the stick. You've got the horse or the donkey, and you can beat it all you want, and there's only so much the donkey can do. But if you put the carrot and dangle the carrot in front of it, it's more likely to do whatever it needs to do to get the carrot. So that's
right. But when you're starting to argue moral choices and moral will using a donkey, you see, you may have slipped down from the divine just a tiny bit.
Well, it's an analogy, but yeah, I get. Well,
right.
it's
but you don't want to treat your child like a donkey, right?
No, but everybody responds to incentives. That's kind of the
Yes.
fundamental principles of everything we know about economics is people respond to incentives. If you make something easier, well, then people are going to do the easier thing. If you make something harder, then they're going to avoid that.
Right.
And like, I think I think what the earlier church did, or what most of the Orthodox Church did, is they focused more on the punishment and the downside, and you're trying to avoid that, which is why they had the first Great Awakening, and then if the punishment aspect worked and scaring people into following God worked, then there would be no need for a second Great Awakening. And it's like they weren't quite getting the memo that maybe this approach isn't working. The fire and brimstone. It'll only motivate them so much, and then once they realize the threat is no longer there, or it's not as immediate as they were led to believe, then they do whatever they want. But if people always have a goal in mind, they always have this is what I'm shooting for. I want this because this is what I want my end game to be. I'm not avoiding something. I'm going towards something. I think that's much more effective.
Yeah, you could say, do you show up for work even if you love it if you don't get paid?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can quit your job. You won't go to jail, but will you show up and do your job if you don't get? I mean, I enjoy what I'm doing. It would be kind of impractical for me to do it if nobody donated a penny. So, okay. I think that the upside is. And I of course, do talk about the positive benefits of philosophy in the long run. So, yeah, I think it's a good point. Very good point.
Yeah. And
I think, sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, the main reason I wanted to ask the question is, it seems like you parallel Christianity for the most part, and I thought it was kind of weird. Because most atheists seem to go completely in the opposite direction, where everything that Christianity has to offer and all of the conclusions that people have arrived at are all bad and we need to abandon it all. And it's kind of like, in my mind, it's whether you believe in God or not, the ultimate way of how to be a good person or how to be a moral person all comes down to the same kind of patterns of behavior.
Right. No, it's a good point. I spent some time fleeing from Christianity towards atheism, and then the funniest thing happened. The weirdest thing happened. I ran into a lot of other atheists. Oh no. Or as I like to call them, amoral nihilistic hedonists who tend towards massive socialism. Oh, lordy. And then I was like, okay, rock, hard place. And I found that when I questioned the atheists, I got a lot of hostility. Oh, look, I found hell, and it comes with a fedora. And I got a lot of hostility. When I questioned Christians about God, I got a lot of friendliness, a lot of I understand, a lot of let me talk it through you, and some hostility, but for the most part I got a lot more positive response questioning Christians about God than I did questioning atheists about the state. Christians were willing, and maybe it's because Christianity is an older belief system, maybe it has matured beyond its toddler phase, but Christians have. The crisis of faith is well known, right? I don't have to tell you anything about this, right? That faith is not an automatic, that faith is a constant challenge, that there will be times when you doubt, and there will be times when you reevaluate, and there will be times when you change direction, not away, but, in terms of how you worship. Your parents did that, right? Went from more hellfire and brimstone, you say, to non-denominational and so on. So there will be all of this that occurs in Christianity. So the wrestling of doubt in Christianity is central and core and has been there from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Why, oh God, hast thou forsaken me? It's been there from the very beginning. Now, atheism, modern atheism, admits no doubt about the state. It is more fundamentalist in general about the state than anything I've ever come across in Christianity. Ever. Christianity has a long and rich tradition of doubt and of reevaluation, of reinvention sometimes. Look at the Protestant Reformation, reinvention. But it seems about as difficult to try and reform the leftist tendencies of atheists as it is to, well, let's just pick out the religions around the world that have some trouble reforming themselves. And it's in that ballpark, in my experience. Yeah. And so I found atheists to be far more dogmatic than Christians. Atheists had a far more hostile response to foundational questions than religion and Christians did. And so it is hard for me to avoid just having more respect for the intellectual curiosity of Christians than of atheists. The God of the atheists is the state in general, infinitely more dangerous than the God of Christianity. Infinitely more dangerous than the God of Christianity. And when you have a belief system that is fostering a much more dangerous outcome than anything that could be conceived of in Christianity, that is an argument from a fact, but that's another reason why I'm like, well, and data, right? Data, right? I mean, the fact is, yes, two parents are by far the best way to raise children. Small government to no government is by far the best way to organize society. Free will is essential for moral responsibility and philosophy, and a lot of atheists have a lot of problem with a lot of these beliefs, and they do not seem to have any capacity to look inward and say, my God, the state, is a false God. My God, the state, is a deceptive God. My God, the state, is Satan in the world as it stands. And this is my concern, that Satanism in the theological context is relatively harmless compared to the worship of the devil called the state. And secularity in the service of Satanism, of truly satanic forces, and the horrors and destruction wrought by the state, 20th century, 250 million people murdered by their own governments. How is that not satanic? How is that not, as Ann Coulter reports it, demonic? This is not even counting the wars.
Yeah, those were apparently times of peace for those governments.
Right. So it's hard for me not to look at atheists and not see them as serving the most ancient devil, which is the justification of centralized, oligarchical, hierarchical violence. And I don't think there's anything more demonic or satanic, to use those terms, in the world. And if the God they worship is a manifestation of a satanic force, I'd rather be on the side of the angels.
Yeah, and when atheism started to gain grounds, it seemed to me like, I wasn't there, but I'm looking back at history and things like that. In my mind, I picture it kind of like this. People are bathing in the Ganges River, and they're being either cured, with quotes around it, or they're seeing improvements in their health and that sort of thing. And the atheists look at it and say, no, God's not real. There's no possible way the Ganges is a miraculous or a holy site. And then they stop having people bathe in the Ganges River, and they have them bathe in, other sources of water. Well, when in actuality, the Ganges, they're burning bodies upstream of where people do their holy dips and things like that, and burning bodies creates lye. And basically what they're doing is they're disinfecting themselves with soap, and they don't realize it. So they're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, but the atheists are like, even though what you're doing is working, but because you think it's because of some supernatural or some holy thing, don't do it at all, and they completely reject it, and they'll have people, do something that is, they'll have them bathe in some river that is kind of like a septic tank or standing water instead. So it's kind of a weird, I guess it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but...
Yeah, Christianity has had 2,000 years to refine how society is structured and organized. And it doesn't seem to me to be an accident that coincidental with the fall of religion was the rise of the nanny state, was the rise of the state as the most dangerous and oppressive church that can be conceived of. I can choose not to be a Christian. I don't pay a tithe. I can't choose to not pay taxes. That is an all-encompassing religion of disaster, of exploitation, of the enslavement of the unborn. And again, I know, I'm going to just put the caveats out there, not all atheists are like that. I know I came out of objectivism, which means I knew a lot of atheists who were small government, anti-free market, and there are atheists in the voluntarist or anarchic community and so on. I get all of that. But I've done the data. I've run the numbers. It's very, very clear that atheists are very significantly, if not overwhelmingly, on the left. They worship the power of the state, which means they've given up convincing people and turned to forcing people. A Christian will say, Jesus said, sell everything you own and give your money to the poor. Jesus would make a case for charity that is voluntary. But the leftist, who is often secular, atheist, the leftist will say, I'm going to take your money by force and I'm going to give it to the poor. They have taken free will out of the equation. The Christian will try to convince me, but will accept if I walk away. You will, right? They're going to chase me down and lock me in a van, right?
Yeah, they won't. And I was just thinking, compare that to compare the pro-life march to the women's march, and you're like, if you disagree with them, they will yell at you and chase you down or attack you if you try to disagree, right?
Right,
Because
Christianity is an argument. Ever since the separation of church and state, Christianity has been an argument. It has been a proposition. It has been a series of statements, of syllogisms, and of incentives and punishments. It is an argument. And you can walk away from it, and nobody chases you down and locks you up. On the left, they have no arguments. On the left, they have violence. Either personal violence in the form of this kind of terrorism that we've seen going on with the marches and riots and so on. Or they run to the state and have the state do it on their behalf because it's safer, right? Mm-hmm. So
it's not
Christianity, I could walk away from disagreeing with the Christian and live intact. I can't walk away from a disagreement with the left who's in pursuit of political action because they'll chase me down with the police. Mm-hmm. And they will lock me in jail.
Well,
and we all know this deep down, and this was part of my cowardice, though it wasn't conscious in me, but this is when I was younger, which is nobody gets in trouble for bagging on Christians. Nobody gets in trouble for insulting or aggressing against Christians. I don't mean physically violently, of course they will, but I mean just in terms of like criticizing the beliefs, criticizing the viewpoints. But a lot of people don't want to take on social justice warriors. A lot of people don't want to take on other belief systems because they're afraid of retaliations or repercussions. And that should tell you a lot about Christians and Christianity, that they must be the nicest people in the room because they're the only ones being bullied. And I couldn't sustain that. I can't abide those kinds of flaws in myself. I can't look and say, brave old me, taking on the nicest people in the room who I know are not going to lash out and punish me. Very, very wrong.
Yeah, and the other thing I was just thinking about is for people who think the government is the only way to solve society's problems and make everyone moral, their system only works if everyone agrees and if everyone is in that same system, whereas people who are against the system, they're like, okay, just if you want to have that, go do that over there and leave us alone. And I mean, Christians are kind of in that same boat where they're like, we would like everyone to embrace Christianity. We would like everyone to accept our beliefs, our morality, our system, and behave like us. But if you don't, we've already, as long as we've presented the message to you and presented our arguments to you, and if you don't accept it, then there's nothing we can do for you, and you just have your fun over there, or you do whatever you want. But for a statist, or even for an anarchist, or not anarchist, wow, there's a terrible slip of the tongue. For an atheist or most statists, the only way their system works, the only way society can move forward is if everyone embraces their point of view and falls in line in their system. And that just seems all kinds of bizarre to me, because that's never going to happen. You can't have 100% of people all agreeing, because it just doesn't work.
Well, here's the thing, too, which is that atheists criticize the Christians for the conception of hell, but the atheists throw people in prison for not following what the atheists want them to do, if they're on the left, right? They want these big government programs, you got to pay for them, and if you don't pay for them, people will come and throw you in jail, right? So how is it remotely rational to criticize Christians for this punishment called hell, while at the same time so many atheists advocate for the secular punishment of prison for disagreement with their ideals? The Christians aren't saying, come to church or go to prison. But the leftist atheists are saying, pay for the welfare state or go to prison. And all that interferes with free will is anathema to me. And Christians, having the respect for free will and knowing that a compelled action is not a virtuous action, give the respect of difference to other belief systems, which is not a function of the state that so many atheists worship. In fact, it's the opposite of the state. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to move on to the next caller. I really, really appreciate the call. You're welcome back anytime. It was very enlightening, and I hope that at least what I had to say is clarifying, at least from my position. It was a great question.
One other topic I wanted to talk about, and hopefully, do you think we got?
We have a lot of callers, so let's just keep it quick. All right.
I was just going to say about statists will say that, and they'll imprison people for not agreeing with them, and then they'll say, but Christians don't want homosexuals to get married. And to me, that seems like a pretty poor argument, but I mean that was I was anticipating as that one of the areas where you would say Christians were wrong about this and that sort of thing. But
well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know you can't speak for all Christians, of course, but as far as I understand it, Christians would like the state disentangled from marriage. Marriage is in the eyes of God, and the separation of church and state should require that marriage be a private ceremony, a contract. And if homosexuals want to have a private contract between themselves, whether it's religious or not, I can't see Christians saying, no, we must throw them in jail for that. I think that the entanglement of the state in marriage has created a volatile area of contention for people of faith and others. But that is because the state is involved in these things, not because there's an innate conflict. I mean, certainly Christians, to take a silly example, Christians would have no trouble with homosexuals engaging in a car lease, right? Signing a contract to lease a car, or signing a contract to buy a house. No, you can't. I mean, it won't happen, right? And so if gays want to have a marriage ceremony in a society which has separated the state and marriage, which of course it should. I mean, the whole licensing for marriage was put in by the Democrats to prevent blacks and whites from marrying, because apparently they're very anti-racist. But I don't think that Christians have a problem with anybody engaging in private voluntary contracts. But when the state owns marriage, and Christians are then forced to subsidize and pay for a belief system that a lot of them would have problems with, or a behavior or lifestyle, well, that's, forced association is a violation of freedom of association.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, because that was my original stance about 10 or so years ago, where I was extremely against the idea of homosexual marriage until someone pointed out, why is the government involved in marriage at all? And I was just like, oh, yeah, if the government just didn't acknowledge any marriages, then okay, yeah, I'm good with it.
It's not the government's business. It's not the government's business.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's my particular. Thanks very much.